All right. Inside your book on pages 210 through 212, we're going to work through questions 4 through 14, number 22, and number 23. Now, I don't have pictures of your book pages here because we need a lot of space in some of these cases to write, and because the whiteboard that I work on in these videos is those pages are quite a bit smaller and it's hard to see sometimes and fit that all in there. I'm going to do it on the whiteboard, and then you can transfer that and use your book. Okay, so we're going to start on question 4. I'll read the question aloud, and then you're going to work it out in your book, okay, on page 210. Number 4, shoes and hats are on sale. The expression 1/4 times S plus $24.80 can be used to determine the discount when you buy shoes with a retail price of S dollars and hats with a total retail price of $24.80. Write another expression that can be used to determine the discount. So what we see in the sign there says that all shoes and hats are going to be 1/4 off, which means we're paying 1/4 of the price for the shoes and 1/4 of the price for hats. So here's the expression that they've given us. Now that $24.80, remember, represents the amount of money spent on the hat. The S is the amount of money spent on shoes. But we're only going to pay 1/4 of the price for the shoes and 1/4 of the price for the hat. So we're going to take 1/4 times each of those terms. So 1/4 times S plus 1/4 times $24.80. So I'm going to show those grouped together here so that we can keep track of those terms. So 1/4 S means 1/4 times S. We don't need to have that multiplication sign between them. But 1/4 of $24.80, remember that $24.80 could be a denominator of 1, means that we're going to take $24.80 and divide by 4. I only want 1/4 of that. So how much would that be for the hats? And to simplify that, when you take $24.80 and you only want 1/4 of that, remember that means divide by 4, you get $6.20. So another expression that can be used to determine the discount is 1/4 S plus 6.20 or $6.20. Now we're going to do the same strategy, this time with questions 5 and 6. On question 5, we're going to distribute the variable x to each of the terms inside parentheses. So x times 4 minus x times 3 4/10 y. So again, when we multiply a variable, we do the exact same strategy as before. So as I multiply x times 4, I'm going to eliminate the sign and put the number first. So I get 4x minus, and when I multiply the x variable times the other term, I put the variables in alphabetical order behind the number. So I get 3 4/10 xy. So my simplified expression is 4x minus 3 4/10 xy. Now let's do the same thing with number 6. You'll notice on number 6 that we have a fraction in front of the parentheses, but inside those parentheses we do have some simplifying that we can do first. So let's combine those like terms. Our expression is going to be -2/10 times the quantity. We're going to put the 1 and the 2 together to make 3, and then we're going to have subtracting 2x behind that. Now we're going to go ahead and distribute that -2/10 to each term inside. So we get -2/10 times 3 minus -2/10 times 2x. Now, again, remember that the 3 and the 2x can be written in fraction form if you put them with a denominator of 1, which makes it a little bit easier when I multiply, because multiplying fractions means numerators get multiplied and denominators get multiplied. So the first term ends up being a negative 6, which is negative 2 times 3, over 10. And the second term ends up being negative 2 times 2x, or negative 4x, over 10. Now I'm going to simplify my fractions and simplify how I write subtracting the negative. So let's first start with simplifying the fractions. So 6 and 10 both divide by 2. So we get negative 3/5 minus a negative. And then we have 4 and 10, which also both divide by 2. So we get negative 2/5 x. Okay, now let's go ahead and simplify the way it's written. Negative 3/5, and then we're going to, instead of subtracting a negative, we're going to add its opposite. And the opposite of a negative 2/5 x is a positive 2/5 x. So there we have our simplified expression. Now let's go on to 7 through 14. And then we also have 22 and 23. All right, so here on this page, you notice that I have 7 through 10. And then we'll go to the next page, the next slide, and you'll see 11 through 14. 7 and 8, though, have boxes for you to fill in. So what I've got is I've got blank spaces or boxes where we're going to be filling in information to simplify those expressions. So number 7, the expression is 3 times the quantity n plus 7, which means we're going to take the 3 and multiply by the n, so 3 times n, and then we're going to take 3 times the 7. Now to simplify that, we're going to combine our terms together. So 3 times n makes 3n, and 3 times 7 makes 21. So our simplified expression is 3n plus 21. Now I'd like for you to look at question 8 and do the same thing. Come back and check your boxes to see if you have them correct. So first we're going to distribute the 4 to each term inside those parentheses, which is the x and the 3. And then we're going to go ahead and simplify by multiplying 4 times x and 4 times 3. And we end up with 4x minus 12. All right, now you go ahead and try question number 9. Remember to distribute the term y to each piece inside those parentheses. Come back and check your answer when you're ready. Pause the video until you're done. Here's the first step for question 9. Here's the second part for number 9. And then if you notice, you have like terms here. So you have 5/10 y and 8y, which means you can add them together. So your final expression is 8 and 5/10 times y. In number 10, notice that you have some like terms inside your parentheses that you can simplify first. So 3 take away 2 is simply 1. And then you have 1 plus 4x inside parentheses. Now go ahead and use your distributive property to distribute the 4 that's outside those parentheses to each piece that's inside. And here we have our distributive property and our simplified expression. Once you've completed all of your work for questions 7 through 10, we'll move on to questions 11 through 14. Here are questions 11 through 14. Go ahead and give these each a try, and then as you finish each question, come back and check your answer. Pause the video between questions and try to do the work and the distributive property on your own. Here's the distributive property and the simplified expression for question 11. For question number 12, don't forget that you can simplify inside the parentheses by combining like terms first. Then use your distributive property. Here's your distributive property step. The expression negative 12 and 5/10 plus negative 10n is an okay answer. You may also write it without the addition sign and change adding a negative 10n to subtracting 10n. So there's another way that you can write that same expression, and they are equivalent. Now let's apply the distributive property to question 13. There's the step where we distribute. There's the simplified version of that. And then we need to make corrections here to the subtracting of a negative. So we're going to rewrite that as adding the opposite. So the simplified expression on question 13 is negative 1/3 y plus 1/3 x. Now apply the distributive property in question 14. And the simplified expression in question 14 is 48x minus 32. We just have a couple more questions to go. Turn to page 212 to see questions 22 and 23. Question number 22 is a select all that apply. We are looking for any expressions in that list, there are 6 choices there, that is equivalent to negative 1/2 times the quantity 4 minus 2 plus 8x. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to simply use our distributive property. We'll do that first before we simplify to see if any of the expressions are equivalent to just applying that distributive property. So we're going to multiply negative 1/2 times the 4, negative 1/2 times the 2, and negative 1/2 times the 8x. So our distributive property looks like this. Now we're going to simplify each of those terms by multiplying each by negative 1/2. So negative 1/2 times 4, remember that's 4 over 1, is a negative 4/2 minus the second term, which is negative 1/2 times 2, which is negative 2/2, plus negative 1/2 times 8x, remember these are both over 1 as well, is a negative 8x over 2. Now let's simplify. Negative 4/2 is the same as negative 2. Negative 2/2 is the same as negative 1. And negative 8/2 x is the same as negative 4x. So all I did was take each of those and treat that fraction as a division question. Now we're going to clean up our subtraction and our negative signs to make our expression more fluid. Negative 2, subtracting a negative 1 is the same as adding 1, plus negative 4x is the same as, subtracting 4x. So there's one expression there. Do you see anything in the list that is equivalent to that expression? If you do, mark that on your paper. The next thing that I'd like for us to do is to simplify. So let's put like terms together. In this case, the negative 2 plus 1 are like terms. They're both constants. So when I see negative 2 plus 1, I'm going to simplify and put them together, and I get negative 1 minus 4x. I don't see that anywhere in our list of choices, but if I turn this around here, remember, subtraction is the same as adding the opposite. I can put the negative 4x in the front and the negative 1 after it. I still don't see any expressions that are equal to that, but remember, adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So it's also equivalent to negative 4x minus 1. And I do see that as one of our choices. Are there any other choices in that list that would be equivalent? And the answer is no. In each of the other choices, there's an error in combining like terms or an error with a negative sign. So you have two answers for number 22. Make sure that your work is in your book next to question 22. Question 23 is not a select all that apply. This is just a multiple choice. So we're going to go ahead and find which of those expressions is equivalent by combining like terms and by using our distributive property. So first in this one, because we're only looking for one correct answer, let's combine our like terms. We have 5 and 10, and together they make 15. So 5 plus 10 is 15. We're still subtracting 7y, and that's what our simplified expression inside those parentheses looks like. Then we're going to multiply 1/5 times each of those terms inside the parentheses. So my simplified expression, or as I use my distributive property, I get 1/5 times 15 minus 1/5 times 7y. Now remember, in order to multiply, you can put the 15 over 1 and the 7y over 1. So as you multiply, you get 1 times 15 and 5 times 1. And in the second part, you get 1 times 7y, and the denominator is still 5 times 1. So now as I look, I don't see anything in my list of choices that matches that, but I do see that I can do the division here and get a whole number answer, because 15 divided by 5 is 3, and we're still going to subtract 7/5 y, because that cannot be combined with anything. And do you see which answer choice that is? You should see answer choice A. Again, make sure that you have your work for this next to question 23. You should be finished up now with both your Cornell notes for lesson 4 and your book work that goes along with that. Make sure that all of your practice and problem solving questions are solved in your book, and make sure that your Cornell notes go with lesson 4.